So, is everybody having a good Comic-Con? I hear the one in one of the alternate timelines is better, but only one. We're outperforming most. So, welcome to our Fly Me to the Moon and Let Me Play Among Those Stars science fiction panel. I'm Mary Elizabeth Giraldi of Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore here in Southern California. And thank you. And I am delighted to be here with a stellar assortment of panelists. And so I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'm going to have a few questions for them from me, and then we'll take questions from the audience. If you're doing questions from the audience, please do them from the microphone so everyone can hear your questions. And also, please make sure all your electronic devices are silenced for the duration. And remember all of the Comic-Con rules about streaming and all the things that they ask so that they can continue to bring us this event. So, without further ado, I'm going to begin with Alexa Dunn. Hi. So, Alexa is a Ravenclaw who wears many hats, one of which I assume is a sorting hat, including teen mentor, college admissions essay advisor, and fan convention organizer, YouTuber, and podcaster. When she's not writing science fiction and fantasy for teens, Alexa works in international television marketing. She is a proud Boston University terrier who lives in Los Angeles with two fluffy ginger cats named after YA literature characters. And yes, what are their names is a legitimate question. So welcome, Alexa. And Marina Lostetter. Marina's original short fiction has appeared in Lightspeed's Women Destroy Science Fiction and Intergalactic Medicine Show, among others. She's also a former winner of the Writers of the Future. An excerpt of Nomenon, which just makes the Muppets go off in my head, was previously published at Baen.com before it became the first novel in the continuing series. From Oregon, Marina now lives in Arkansas with her husband, Alex. She enjoys globetrotting, board games, and all things art-related. Welcome, Marina. And Greg Van Eekhout. So, everybody say with me, Greg. There is no running in the autograph area. If you don't know.
I broke my leg 2 years ago in the autograph area. That's running. I continued to sign books until I passed out.
That's dedication.
Greg's bio also includes the fact that he is the author of 7 novels, including the California Bones trilogy for adults and Voyage of the Dogs for middle grade readers, which is coming in September. He lives here in San Diego with his astronomy/physics professor wife and 2 adorable, very, very good dogs. Welcome, Greg. And Comic-Con special guest, Tilly Walden. Tilly is a cartoonist and illustrator from Austin, Texas, who was born in 1996, but we still like her. Every time, I'm sure. At some point, though, what's weird is it will be like, there'll be people born in like 2016, and you'll just be, yeah.
That's going to be a good day.
She is a graduate from the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont. Over the course of her time at CCS, she published 3 books with London-based Avery Hill Publishing. Her graphic novels with First Second include her autobiographical work, Spinning, and the science fiction epic On a Sunbeam. So as of the writing of her bio, which I was provided with, she was a 2-time Eisner nominee and Ignatz Award winner, but we can now translate that to Eisner winner. When Tilly is not in Los Angeles drawing comics, she can be found walking and listening to audiobooks or asleep with a cat. Welcome, Tilly. And Sylvain Novelle. Sylvain is the author of the Themis Files, which include Sleeping Giants, Waking Gods, and Only Human. He is a linguist and translator based in Montreal, and he is currently at work on an R2-D2 replica and his next novel, and does really amazing cosplay with his kids. Welcome.
I like that.
And at the far end of the panel, hello, Maura Milan. Maura grew up in Chicago, but now resides in Los Angeles, where she works in video production. She can be found in cafes drinking green tea lattes and writing and writing and writing. In her free time, she enjoys watching Korean dramas, collecting K-pop gifts, and hanging out with her dog, Thor, who she believes should become a professional comedian. She received a BA from USC School of Cinematic Arts.
Yeah, USC.
That is an accomplishment. It does, yes. And she has placed a number of short films in festivals all over the United States. Ignite the Stars is her forthcoming debut novel. Welcome, Maura. So, in keeping with the theme of the panel, we're going to look at the works of the authors and the ways that in their voyages they explore questions of destiny and relationships. They look at clones, they look at culture clashes, they look at giant robots, empires and rebel forces, settling brave new worlds, unearthing ancient secrets, and, of course, butt sniffing. This is where we all look at Greg because his characters are dogs. They're the Barkanauts. Butt sniffing is important.
In so many ways.
So, my first question to the panel is, which came first with this work? Was it the setting? Was it putting something in space? Or was it telling a story and space was an appropriate setting for it? And as the fortunate person who sat next to me, you get to go first, Alexa.
Yay. Well, this one's really easy for me. My book, Brightly Burning, is Jane Eyre in space. And so the plot came first because I set myself the challenge, well, why hasn't there been a big, juicy YA Jane Eyre retelling? Because every person I know loves Jane Eyre. And I was like, well, maybe because it's Gothic. It's kind of hard, and the age difference. And I was like, how would you make that work? Set it in space. So it was the challenge of basically translating a famous Gothic romance novel into space, and it works. I mean, I'm not saying this is like amazing, but like it worked well from a fun, creative point of view. It works really well because space is terrifying and really creepy. So it was definitely the plot.
I also tend to be a very plot-first type of writer.
Please silence the bell.
So for me, this is what I like to call my big dumb object book. So I love alien artifacts and weird megastructures and long dead civilizations. And I was like, what can I do with that? Where am I going? We're heading off into the sunset again. So for me, it was definitely plot. It made sense to, if you're gonna have a giant alien artifact, it should probably be in space. So.
Well, Voyage of the Dogs is a middle grade book about dogs on a deep space interstellar mission. So honestly, the question isn't so much for me, how did I come up with it? Was it the plot first, characters first, settings first? I just don't know why it took me so long. Like, why not on like day one when I clocked in as a writer, did I not start writing a book about dogs on a voyage in space? So I knew that I wanted to write a book about dogs because I needed to write something after a really dark adult trilogy that was comforting and fun and like a headspace I felt like occupying for 6 months to a year or whatever. And dogs right now, especially in today's stressful global climate, are about the only thing I can manage to think about for a sustained period of time. So.
On a Sunbeam is my space webcomic, which is going to be printed as a book this fall, and it's about this group of, well, it's two stories. One storyline is a young girl at a boarding school in space who meets another mysterious girl. Spoiler, there's some love involved. And then the second storyline is this girl, Mia, as she's older, living with a group of women on a spaceship as they travel around the galaxy, restoring old buildings that are floating around in space. And one of the things that helped me come up with this story idea was that I really don't like most sci-fi, which feels weird to say in this room. Please don't throw tomatoes at me. Because a lot of it is very cold and very sort of male and modern and kind of overly dramatic and kind of focused on these like big explosions. And I'm much more interested in like small moments of when like, you know, you accidentally brush the shoulder of the girl you like and like you melt. And only that in outer space is like very, very interesting to me, and I'm much more interested in kind of warm colors, trees, nature, old buildings. And so I took all that and kind of put it in this. And then I realized as I was making this space webcomic, I was like, I don't know how to draw a spaceship. I don't know what a spaceship is supposed to look like. But then I was like, but I can draw fish. So all the spaceships are just giant fish. Like easy problem solving. And so then all of that just kind of came together, and then now I guess I have a space webcomic.
I usually start writing, I start with strong visuals. I have like these 3-4 images in my head, like little girl falls into a giant hand, someone walking up to a 20-story tall robot, and I have like some of those. And I sort of organize the plot around it so I can get from like one of those, one image to the next, and then there's a book. And I do send my characters to another world, but they just appear over there. They disappear here and they reappear over there. So technically, they're never in space. I don't know if I'm allowed to stay now.
You can, it's okay.
I can?
It's at the Totoro, it's okay.
Ignite the Stars is about a notorious space criminal who terrorizes the known galaxies. So if it's between plot and setting, I would say what came first was character. So I came up with her first, and then I figured out the story around it, because I basically did it on the ride home, like figuring out the world and the setting from that.
All right, so I'm guessing some people fudged this a little, what with the fish as spaceships, but so my follow-up question is, what research, if any, did you put into creating these stories in order to lend verisimilitude? Do you want to start, Maura? We'll come back this way.
So my book is set in space, and there's a lot of like starships and starjets and a lot of space travel. So I went to JPL, and there was nothing there, which kind of sucked. But I figured out, I got to see the amazing space in which they built the rovers and everything. And then I also ended up doing a simulation for basically like learning how to fly a jet, but in virtual reality. So I got to sit in this.
That's rad.
I want to do that.
It was fun. It was fun. I had to like pretend that I was actually flying. Basically, to fly a jet, you just have to go really fast, and that's it. Just fly as fast as you can. Yeah.
Research?
So, yeah, I didn't research space because they don't go to space. But I researched everything else, though, like down to the food they'll eat at a restaurant. I want my characters to eat something good, so I'll go read reviews of the place I send them at, and so get them to order something good. I researched there's a scene happening, like there's a helicopter crash in the first book. I know where it's at. I saw it on the map. I actually picked the location first. Saw there were a bunch of weird lined up little trees, and then I spent 3 days trying to figure out what these little trees were, and like researched what they grew in this area of Turkey, and eventually figured out it was a pistachio field. So the research actually sort of came, like dictated where this thing was. And squirrels. I researched squirrels. There's a squirrel story in the second book, and I read 3-4 scientific papers on squirrel nut retrieval capabilities.
That was a good story.
No space, but squirrels.
Wow. Yeah, I made everything up. But I researched real things and then just kind of plopped it into space. So, like, there's a part of the outer space in On a Sunbeam called the Staircase, which is this very, like, it's basically like Texas floating in space, full of, like, evil creatures. And so I, like, kind of looked around when I was living in Texas, and I was like, okay, yeah, I can do that. That was my research.
I did a little research. My wife is an astronomy physics professor, so I could just ask her space stuff, and she would say, like, but my first reader reaction to my book was hers. Woke up at like 7 in the morning, and she just looks at me and says, like, dude, your numbers are jacked up. So, so that was great. I did a little research into the psychological effects of deep space travel. There was like an experiment done by the Russian, European, and Chinese space agencies called Mars 500, which they basically did a simulation of a 520-day Mars mission. They locked these people like basically in a fake spaceship and left them there for over a year. And the gist of it was, after a long while, they start to sort of passive-aggressively hate each other. So nobody passively aggressively hates a dog. Like, you either love a dog or you're a monster.
Solid.
Thank you.
We got some dog fans here.
Yeah, well, because they're not monsters is why. So it made sense to me, actually, like, it's realistically that if you have a really long space mission, like an interstellar mission, that it might actually make sense to have dogs there as comfort animals.
Absolutely. So,
Dogs, right?
dogs, pets, comfort animals. I actually have comfort cows in mind. New Mountain takes place over several thousand years, and a lot of it's aboard a generation ship that is occupied by clones. So I did a lot of research into social engineering and genetic engineering. And then my husband is an electrical engineer, and there is kind of an interesting little discovery that they make at the end that I went to my husband and I was like, does this make sense from a electrical engineering standpoint? Could you do this with this? And he was like, oh my God, yes, and I've never seen anybody do that before. So I out-engineered the engineer, and that was really exciting for me. So.
My rule of thumb when writing, because I was a journalism major, so I don't have a science background, if it happened on Battlestar Galactica, I figured it was pretty solid. and then I have a beta reader who is a rocket scientist, and another one who has a science background, and I was like, here, tell me if I really messed up. And I did make a couple of changes. And then there's one thing I did legitimately research. I love natural disasters, and I actually took a class on that in college. So they are in space because of a natural disaster that started a ice age, and so I did research into supervolcanoes and ice ages, but I also had already taken that class, and it's really cool, and if Yosemite explodes, we're all gonna die.
Fun fact.
Also, if you want to read a projection of that, Harry Turtledove has a great series where that's pretty much the thing that sets everything off as well. So whatever the method of getting from place to place is, which is usually going to be extended voyages, sometimes shorter, sometimes thousands of years, sometimes fairly instantaneous, there's always going to be limitations on what you're able to take with you. So what's the thing you couldn't go without? Let's jump to Tilly to start.
Wait, whoa.
So we're sending you off into space.
Yeah.
And you only have so much carry-on.
Oh.
Like you think the airlines are strict. What's the thing that's like the non-required thing that you want to take with you?
This is strange, but I was a competitive figure skater for a very long time. My other book, Spinning, is all about that. And figure skaters do this thing where they exchange these little pins with like competitive teams. And I am like, for whatever reason, I'm very attached to my pins. They're really beautiful. They're all kind of shiny, and I think I would need my pins with me to have like the strength of the ice skaters. Now, which direction do we go?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. I have a room at home in which I store and display collectible objects that are sometimes used for amusement as well.
Toys?
Yeah. but maturely, I go there to resource, but in a very mature way. So
Sure.
I would like to take the toy room with me.
Whole room?
The whole room.
That feels like cheating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We had two carry-ons. We got carry-on and what's the airline say?
Well, speaking
Remember, you
of,
can like a personal item.
It's really like a big, gigantic cabinet that takes up the whole wall. So it is one thing.
Okay.
well,
Sticking to it.
my cheat would be an e-reader. I would take books. And I actually have a whole thing in here. I'm obsessed with books, and so there's a massive digital library, and I'm very hyper-focused on the books people read in space, because it would be boring. And my backup would be cats, but that seems deeply impractical.
I was gonna say
oh,
cat,
yeah,
yeah.
sorry, that's, I love books. Are you shocked? So, book, e-reader.
Yeah. I was gonna say cat.
Okay,
I would
there you
take
go.
the cat.
There, okay, you can have the cat.
Can the thing live? Is it okay? Or am I like shoving it in a locker? And it's like,
You can have comfort cows, you can have comfort
okay,
cats.
I would take a cat.
I really love K-dramas, so I would. Yeah, I would bring all the K-dramas with me somehow. So I'd bring my Drama Fever subscription and Viki TV subscription on a laptop, or I'd hook it up to whatever display is in that spaceship, just so that I could just survive with my dramas. Yeah. And then my dog too. Yeah.
Well, I require a lot of maintenance to keep me going, so this is going to be difficult. I'm going to need whiskey. I'm going to need comfortable socks and a lot of spare underwear, so I always feel fresh.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, they're going
We were
to.
packing like clothes.
yeah.
Like,
Well, they're going to
Assumed
give
we
you.
had
not
underwear.
going to space naked with a cat. That sounds like a bad
You made that choice. And dogs, because otherwise I will passively, aggressively hate everyone I'm sharing the spaceship.
Can I just be astonished that you did not list tacos?
They're going to feed us, right?
I don't know, you didn't think they were going to close
All right,
here.
well, okay, then I also want tacos, and I want coffee.
I want Cool Ranch Doritos.
Right. No. What? I kind of like it too.
All right. There may not be one for you, Tilly, but I'm just going to start with Maura and come back this way so we don't have the middle of the panel, which way do we go, confusion again. A work not your own, set in a science fiction space setting that you enjoy. It doesn't have to be the best, it doesn't have to be dispensable. All you're doing is saying, I really like pigs in space on the Muppet Show, or whatever.
Okay, this is easier for me. I really love Cowboy Bebop, and I think I think it's one of the best animated series ever till this day. It was actually my first one was Trigun, and then I did Cowboy Bebop back in the day. And in my book, there's a little bit of influence. I named some characters after a corgi. So, yeah, I'd say Cowboy Bebop. And also, I want to give a shout out to Event Horizon, because I don't know, I feel like people need to love that movie more. It's amazing. But yeah.
I'm a BSG fan, so I'll just stick to it. I like The Expanse too, though. It's a good show. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of anything.
Just see Star Trek.
I haven't seen Star Wars?
I'm going to say the original late 70s Battlestar Galactica, because humanity's hanging on just by a bare thread, but they still have time for disco. And I find that incredibly encouraging.
Oh, and it's so hard to pick. I love space a lot, so it's like the entire gambit is just at my disposal. I really love Contact. Both the movie and the book, yeah. And also, you guys are going to be jealous, but I got to read an advanced copy of a book called Velocity Weapon by Megan O'Keefe that's coming out from Orbit next year, and it is so good, and you should all buy it. It's got an unreliable narrator and like a funky timeline, and it's super cool.
This panel's full of my people, and I love all of you, so, because BSG in Contact. So I'm going to go with Across the Universe by Beth Revis. It is a YA novel. It came out in 2012, and it's the reason I write YA sci-fi. It is a murder mystery on a generation ship, and it is amazing. It's a trilogy.
All right, so we are now going to move to the portion where you guys get to ask the questions. So if you will be polite and line up at the microphone, and please remember that questions are questions, not statements.
Hello, my name is Jen. So my question is, in sci-fi, specific stuff like Star Wars and stuff, there's a mix of fantasy as well as like, being in space and everything. Have you guys ever kind of like mixed fantasy and sci-fi a little bit? Or like when pushing the edge of what is known, do you have to like create a bit of the fantastical and kind of like fudge it as sci-fi? And do you guys think that is an important aspect of sci-fi as well?
I think it's really important. There's usually a lot of gimmies. My gimme, and usually all sorts of gimmies and different things, have to do with faster than light travel. So mine is, I call it subdimensional travel, and they kind of get around the laws of physics by going into a bubble, and it's a total just hand-wavium sort of solution to get around the faster than light thing. So I think a lot of us have to kind of do those little things that we couch it as science fiction, but it's really just, we made it up for convenience. So.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, especially with things like faster than light travel, you know, shrinking people, whatever, that science fiction in a lot of ways is sort of the fantasy that we're given permission to believe actually exists. Because a lot of science fiction is just as much BS as magic and swords. I love that sort of blurring of the genres. I did a science fiction fantasy story called In the Late December, which was trying to talk about what the actual end of the universe, the heat death of the universe would be like from the point of view of Santa Claus, who's still trying to find kids to deliver toys to, even though like their atoms are literally like separating. So I think, but no, it was pretty dark. But that's a really fun blurring the genre, and I wish that people were less stringent on trying to keep those two genres separate.
I obviously think it's okay. I think space, sci-fi, fantasy, any genre should be, or your story should be whatever you want it to be, and it can blur any lines that you want. Genres are for like marketing purposes, really, when you get down to it, and that when we write and create worlds, you should feel free to do whatever you want.
That's a great answer.
There's a book by Rosemary Kirstein. I'm sure I mess up her name every time I say it, but it's called The Steerswoman. It's out of print, but I think the ebook's available online. It's based on the scientific method, and basically she is working at turning this fantasy world in which she lives in, there are dragons in there, but in explaining things using the scientific method and turning her world into a sci-fi world, essentially. It's a great book, well written too.
What was the name again?
The Steerswoman. S-T-E-E.
Steerswoman?
Steerswoman. Yes.
Steerswoman, that's a mouthful.
That's cool. Thank you for that recommendation. I'm going to look that up.
And then I just like putting fantasy tropes into sci-fi, so I'm going hard in my next book on princesses and like courtship and balls. None of this makes sense in space. I mean, the gravity barely makes sense in space on these spaceships, so I like to kind of mesh those together so the lines are really blurry, which I think is easy to do in YA especially.
And for my book, I try to do as much research as I can, but obviously I'm not going to know everything. So yeah, I will kind of make up different technologies that might not be scientifically correct. And I totally agree with Tilly. I feel like, you know, whatever you want to do, like, it doesn't, like, if you're writing a sci-fi thing but also want to include fantasy elements, I totally think that's fine. I feel like we are the gods of our universes, so we could do whatever we want, so.
Thank you.
Hi. You kind of just mentioned it. There's a lot of tropes in fantasy and sci-fi. Are there any tropes that you think, like, the world would be better if they just disappeared?
Oh, no. Fridging women for dudes' man pain? That one can go away forever as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, rape as traumatic backstory?
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I don't entirely know what a trope is, but I'm going to try and answer the question anyways. I'm just being honest. I think a lot of tropes can be reclaimed. So, like, I love to take stuff that, like, straight people have been using and just, like, make it gay. You know? Why not? I sense there are some queer people in the audience. How do we follow up on that?
I would like to see an end to people of or aliens as a metaphor for people of color.
I got nothing.
No, that's good. Thank you.
I don't know. I mean, I love tropes, so.
My question is for Tilly. Is there anything else you can tell us about the characters in your new sci-fi story? Because I'm really interested.
In On a Sunbeam? Sure. It's so the storyline about Mia, who's the main character in her boarding school. She meets this girl Grace, who just sort of appears at the school, and it's a boarding school where, I don't know about you guys, but I had a lot of weird freedom as a kid, and so they basically just have free reign to kind of run around this beautiful school and do whatever they want. They play this sport there where they fly around in little fish spaceships and have to like collect these balls, and they're terrible at it. They're so bad. I love having characters who are like, you know what, I'm gonna be excellent at this sport, and they work really hard and they're still not good at it, because that is so relatable. And then later on, they're with this group of women, and it's Mia, Alma, Shar, Elliot, who is non-binary, Alma and Shar, these two women in a relationship. It's basically just this little queer family on this fish, living together, and they all have this backstory, and they're all kind of hurting in different ways. And Grace is kind of the big question of the story, like, who is Grace? Where is she from? What's the deal? So that's sort of them, and it's free to read online. You can just Google On a Sunbeam and read it all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
But it's really, really lovely gathered in a book because I have a physical copy, I will say.
That's cool.
Because
Just got printed.
because they know I'm not good at the technology and probably wouldn't read it all online.
No, the
They-
website's really nice. My dad made it for me. Sorry.
That dude took my question about tropes anyway, but I'm going to draft
really?
off of him. So tropes, like there are definitely many that should go away and just kind of stay away forever. But you mentioned that there are some that can be reclaimed. What's one trope that has been either done dirty in your opinion or one that you personally would like to reclaim in your writing? Did I ask too hard?
No, we're
did
just-
I
No, I'm
do
going to
that?
say it is.
Am I good?
It was hard because. Sort of maybe not a reclaiming of a trope, but I like the subversion of the chosen one trope.
Yeah.
I mean, I like the idea that people who are chosen ones, I love it when they turn out to not be chosen ones, because that's sort of something like you were born with privilege, and then your privilege doesn't actually make you a hero. I like that subversion. I also like the subversion that any dorkwad on the street has the stuff to become a hero, and then we are choosing ourselves. We each have to choose to be a hero. You are choosing yourself as the chosen one. I'm going to say chosen again 3 more times.
You're valid. It's fine.
I was thinking about that too, the whole chosen one thing, and I also sort of hate when a chosen one is always usually like a very able-bodied, capable person, and so like Grace in On a Sunbeam is autistic, and I mean, this isn't a spoiler, but she is very connected into like being a bit chosen, and I really want to try more and more to make a chosen one be someone who is not the standard or what people think the standard is.
Yeah, I like The Last Jedi for the same reason people hate it, I guess. I like that Rey's parents, I hope it's true. If they don't change it later on, I'll be pissed. But like, I like that she comes from nothing, and it's not her, mom and dad that make her important or special. Or
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for being here. This is awesome. I'm wondering, so since most of you are creating new worlds in science fiction or fantasy, do you have ways of keeping track of the rules that you have to create in your worlds? And do you find that outlining or pantsing is the way that you like to write?
I'm a pantser, and I've been struggling with this actually. So what I do is I write chapter by chapter, and then I will encounter some sort of hole, and I'm like, oh no, this sucks, I should totally change it, and then I'll go back and try to fix it. So I like retcon a little bit, but yeah, that's kind of how I do it. I just try to make notes, like little sticky notes, to make sure I get certain terms. Sometimes I'll write, and I'll be like, what was the name of this planet again? So I have to like go back and figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to keep in mind that everyone creates worlds differently and everyone writes differently. So for some people, keeping a really organized outline, mapping out your characters, making a map, really building the universe really works and feeds them creatively. And for me, that doesn't especially work. I just need to kind of like vomit out ideas and then let someone else find the inconsistencies. And most of the time, I don't even care. But the point is that you just have to figure out what's the one way for you to create a world that really helps you get excited about it and want to think about it more and more. So, everyone, I'm sure, here built their world in a slightly different way.
Oh yeah, if I didn't outline, I would never finish anything.
Yeah.
I
No, but
absolutely
everyone's
have
different.
to have a plan. Yeah. So
but
it
that helps you
definitely-
creatively? Like, do you feel like having a plan gets you
Oh,
excited about it?
That's the outlining is my favorite part because it's the part where it can make no sense whatsoever, but it's all there on the page, and it's kind of very like train of thought.
Yeah.
And then if anybody ever read my outlines, they wouldn't look like outlines. They'd be like, what is this garbage that doesn't make any sense? Because it's definitely like, I have this idea, and then this idea, and then this idea, and then I know what I'm actually taking out of that to make a cohesive story, but nobody else looking at my outline would probably actually call it an outline, but I definitely have to do that in order to facilitate the productivity.
I'm a diehard pantser. I can't outline to save my life, but I write character-driven stories, and I can't figure out the world until I know what the character's doing, and that's how I come up with questions like, well, what's their day-to-day life like? What's the government like? How does money work? And I figure that out while I write, and I just fix all the inconsistencies later. I love revision, so it's fine. But yeah, and I kind of jot down notes, but I write almost nothing down, which, copy editor loves. Yeah.
I would strongly recommend, as to the world building part of your question, assembling a wiki of all. Like, I've never done that because it sounds like work. But with my trilogy, the California Bones trilogy, I didn't do it. And then by the time I got to the last book and I was tired and beaten and scarred, I couldn't remember anything. So I actually had to do the worst thing, my least favorite thing, which is go back and read my own writing. Right. So if I'd had a wiki, that would have really saved me from that pain. So give it some thought. I don't know if it'll work or not. Like I said, I have no clue. Especially for a series. Or you know what? I'd love to be one of these writers that's so popular that they can just outsource that stuff to their fans. Like, hey,
There's a fan wiki that you can reference for your own work.
Right, or I just see people put it out on social media, like, hey, what happened in that book? And then people say, well, this is what you wrote. And
You're like,
I can do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I was wondering, as there's a queer person and a couple people of color on this panel, is it okay to not want to bear the responsibility of representing your group? Because I'm queer and disabled and a bunch of other stuff, but my main character is a white boy, and he's able-bodied. He's not straight, but he doesn't have too many mental issues. And is that okay for me to do?
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is. And I think it's important to remember that this whole thing about diversity right now it's not actually about what's in your story, it's about who's telling the story. And you yourself are a part of marginalized groups, and by sitting down and creating something, no matter what you're creating, that in itself is an act of supporting your group, your people. So that's all you have to do.
Okay, so I'm just going to call on Mira because I can see far enough to see her and nobody's at the mic. Mira, do you have a question for my authors?
call out. It's like the teacher.
Would you like to know credit card numbers or anything?
What do you do when you literally paint yourself into a corner and you're like, how do they get out of this? They're all gonna die.
Yeah, well, sometimes what I do is I just look at what I've already put on the table, because you've got your characters and they're in this corner, and you're trying to say okay, do I need to build new story to get them out of that? But sometimes you'll just find oh no, I put this robot on page 30 and this robot is capable of opening that door. So then you just go backtrack a little, maybe add a little stuff so that it now makes sense for that robot to open that door. So a lot of the times you've already solved your own problems. And I think stories are better actually when they really exploit the pieces you've already created rather than just piling on other stuff. Yeah. Yeah, and also stories can get teetery and a little off. You can sort of tell when a writer starts adding stuff because they did paint themselves into a corner. So use the hammer, not the putty. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
I also ask for help sometimes if I really don't know. Like I'll ask my editor or a friend and have them read it. And often the solution is right in front of us, but you get tunnel vision with your own work. You're so stuck in your universe and your characters. Sometimes the most obvious thing that should happen you can't see. So if you have the, because I know it can be scary to share your work with other people, especially when it's unfinished, but like sometimes that's really what you got to do.
And also, I think writers who are in that position, they just need to like take a break because sometimes you just you overthink things too much. So like, take a walk around the block or take a nap or Netflix binge something.
I like the nap idea.
Yeah, naps are great. You wake up and then you have that answer sometimes. So.
Pat Benatar.
Pat Benatar.
Yeah.
All the answers are
put
with Pat
Benatar on, and 20 minutes later, it all works out.
She's the guru.
I'm telling you, try it.
I will.
Can we also at some point have time to mention where we are after this and other Comic-Con things we're going to be doing? I don't know if everyone else is doing other Comic-Con things after this, like signings or booths or where our books are.
I would tell everybody to go to table AA09 after this to see all of you there, and that some of you have books from the future. We'll have books there, which is very exciting, which is Greg and Maura. Sure.
Do you guys have things? I'm saying this because I have something I need to tell you about. Because I am a guest and have this nice tassel, I get a spotlight panel where it's just me, and I don't know if anyone here knows Jen Wang's work. She did Prince and the Dressmaker. It's amazing. But tomorrow at 11 in room 4, Jen and I are just going to be like talking about my work, Jen's work, and like cool things. So you should come by, please, because I don't want to be alone with Jen. No, I'm kidding. She's great. Just come. Anyone else have any other panels, things they're on?
No,
I do. I have the Del Rey panel tonight. It's super fun. It's a bunch of Del Rey authors. We're going to have a great time. It's usually it's a very good panel, but it's at 7 o'clock at night. So, yeah. So eat, drink plenty of water, and come to the panel at 7. I have no idea where it is, though.
And we're all signing after this, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so after this, in AA09, AA is not the Artist Alley, although the people in AA09 and Artist Alley are probably fabulous, and you should visit them too, but it's the autograph area, table 9, so the other side of ballroom 20, there will be all of our authors who will walk there in a proper fashion, and their books. No, I'm not going to let that go.
Never going to let it go.
Yes?
So I like hearing all your different visions for what could happen in space and all the sci-fi that you like. I'm curious if we all, as a human race, got our act together enough to actually do more in space. What do you think is the most realistic vision for what we'd be like in space, or do you think we don't even make it off the rock? Is it like a Wall-E pleasure cruise in space, or is it like a Firefly colonial, kind of thing?
Y'all have the really
or in between
spouses too.
Oh, well, my dim view is that it's just going to be toxic capitalism in space. Because, yeah, sorry.
Oh, but that's so boring.
And puppies.
I think you need some seriously bad shit to happen if you want it to not be horrible. We need something really, really, really bad to bring everyone together. Find someone from another world we can hate more, and then maybe we'd sort of be okay with one another. But I think without bad shit, we'll be the same idiots up there too. It doesn't, yeah.
So that's a bummer, but toxic capitalism.
Y'all really
came with puppies.
dim views of the future, man. I think at someday we will get our shit together. We will look around, we will say, what the heck are we doing to ourselves in this planet? And we will figure out how to go and explore and be good to each other. And I think that is realistic, and I'm sticking to that story.
That's better.
Hi. When writing your secondary and tertiary characters, how far into their stories do you go? Do you think about them in the same depth that you do as your main characters, or do you use them as a convenient plot point, or both?
So I hate to be the spoil sport, but I actually got the stop sign, so everybody's answer is going to be very brief. However, we mentioned the AA09 thing, and you can certainly ask people more questions there. So everybody gets to say lots of thought or not much at all.
Both.
What she said.
I can't remember.
Yes.
I would say both too, yeah.
We did it.
Yay!